She looked at you and made an assessment. Quick, comfortable, confident. She looked at the way you showed up. Patient, consistent, genuinely invested. And she placed you in a category she thought she recognized. Just another guy. Another man who would absorb whatever the dynamic asked of him. Another reliable presence that required nothing from her in return for its reliability. She thought she had you figured out in the first few impressions. And the specific, costly mistake she made was not in the assessment itself. It was in deciding the assessment was final. Like and subscribe to Stoic Blessing. We show up every week for the man doing the hard work. Let's get into it. The first thing to understand is how the just another guy assessment gets formed, because understanding the mechanism is what prevents you from absorbing it as a permanent truth, rather than a temporary and correctable error in perception. The just another guy assessment is almost never the product of genuine evaluation. It is the product of pattern matching. The human mind, processing the overwhelming volume of information that daily life contains, relies heavily on categories, on the recognition of familiar patterns, and the assignment of new information to existing frameworks. When you arrived in her life presenting the specific combination of patience, availability, and consistent investment that the pattern of familiar reliability produces, her mind did what minds do. It matched the pattern to the existing category. Reliable, available, familiar, safe. Nothing wrong with those qualities in themselves. Everything wrong with the category they were used to contain. Marcus Aurelius wrote about the specific failure of categorical thinking, the tendency of the mind to stop seeing what it thinks it has already categorized and understood. The category of just another guy is the specific failure of vision that familiarity produces. It stops the inquiry before the inquiry has gone deep enough to encounter what is actually there. And what is actually there, the specific, unrepeatable, genuinely distinctive combination of who you are, is not a category, it is a person. And persons, encountered fully and over sufficient time, almost always turn out to be more than whatever category was initially applied to them. The just another guy assessment was never about who you actually are. It was about how quickly her mind moved to categorize rather than to genuinely see. Comment below, not just another guy, if you knew from the beginning that the category they put you in was the wrong one. Here is what the just another guy assessment costs the person who makes it. The specific, accumulating, lived experience cost that no amount of initial confidence in the assessment can indefinitely defer. The cost arrives through the contrast effect. Every moment that the full, specific, genuine reality of who you are begins to emerge through the category that was imposed on it, the gap between the category and the reality widens. The specific warmth that was real versus the warmth that other available men provide. The specific consistency that came from character versus the consistency that comes from habit or desperation. The specific quality of attention and genuine investment that you brought versus the quality that the category of just another guy had led her to believe was interchangeable with any other instance of the same category. Epictetus taught that human beings suffer not from their circumstances, but from the judgments they make about their circumstances, and that the most expensive judgments are the ones that are made too quickly and held too firmly. The just another guy judgment was made quickly. It was held with the comfortable confidence of someone who believed the pattern recognition was accurate. And the cost of that judgment is now being delivered through the specific, patient, irrefutable corrective of reality, through the growing recognition that what was dismissed as familiar was actually singular, and that singular things, once lost, do not appear again in the next available instance of the same category. Comment below, not replaceable, if what she categorized as common turned out to be one of a kind. Now the Stoic demand, the one that matters most, and is hardest to honor in the specific emotional landscape of this situation. You cannot let her eventual recognition of the assessment's error become the measure of your worth. You cannot make her discovery that you were not just another guy, the restoration of the self-respect that the initial categorization temporarily damaged. Because if her recognition is what restores you, if the correction of her assessment is what makes you feel okay about yourself, then your sense of yourself was never truly independent of her judgment. It was always organized around her as the authority. And worth organized around an external authority is always vulnerable to that authority's fluctuations. The Stoic work is the permanent, daily, practiced relocation of your worth from the variable territory of her eventual understanding to the solid ground of your own daily choices and your own developing character. Marcus Aurelius was unambiguous about this. He did not measure the quality of his governance by whether Rome eventually appreciated it. He measured it by the daily, internal, entirely private question of whether his choices reflected the man he had decided to be. That question, answered honestly, acted on consistently, was the measure, not her assessment, not her eventual correction of her assessment, his own daily accounting with his own values. The man who builds his sense of himself on that question does not need her recognition to feel okay. He is already okay, in the specific, earned, internally generated way that comes from the daily practice of genuine integrity. Her eventual understanding is pleasant confirmation, not the source. Comment below my measure if you've built a standard for yourself that doesn't require anyone else's recognition to stay standing. Let's talk about what was actually happening in the period of the just another guy categorization, the period when you were being seen as something you were not, and the specific question was what you were going to do with that experience. Because there are two possible responses to being miscategorized, and they produce entirely different outcomes. The first response is the one that confirms the categorization, absorbing the misreading without consequence, continuing to invest at the same level regardless of the treatment, making the just another guy category comfortable and sustainable through the unconditional nature of your presence. This response feels like patience. It is actually the specific error that Seneca warned about most directly, the error of giving your most valuable things without any relationship to whether they are being genuinely received. The second response, the Stoic response, is to allow reality to do its correcting work, not through argument or announcement, but through the natural consequence of a man who has standards. Not the dramatic standards of ultimatums and confrontations. The quiet standards of a man who invests fully in connections that are genuinely meeting him and withdraws naturally from connections that are not. That withdrawal, organic, undramatic, simply the honest expression of a man who values his own investment, is what begins the correction of the just another guy category. Not because the withdrawal is designed to correct it, because the withdrawal is the natural behavior of a man who never actually fit the category in the first place. And natural behavior, sustained consistently and without performance, eventually corrects every misreading. Comment below, standards, not ultimatums, if the correction happened not through a speech, but through the simple honesty of how you showed up. Here is what genuine distinctiveness actually is, because this is the concept that reframes the entire just another guy narrative from a wound into useful information. Genuine distinctiveness is not about being the most impressive, the most accomplished, the most visibly exceptional person in the room. That kind of distinctiveness is always relative and always fragile. There is always someone more impressive in some specific dimension, and worth built on comparison is always one better comparison away from collapse. Genuine distinctiveness is not comparative. It is existential. It is the specific, simple, profound reality that you are the only person who is you, who has your specific history, your specific values, your specific way of moving through the world, and that the combination of those things, expressed consistently through genuine character and genuine daily investment in becoming more yourself, produces something that cannot be duplicated regardless of how many people are searched. Seneca wrote about the man of genuine character being unlike anyone else, not because he has manufactured distinction, but because he has had the honesty and the discipline to become fully, specifically, authentically himself. That specificity, the deep, fully inhabited, daily practiced specificity of a man who knows who he is and refuses to dilute it for convenience or approval, is what produces genuine distinctiveness, not the performance of it, the reality. And the reality is available to every man who does the genuine, daily, unsexy work of becoming more himself rather than more impressive, more honest rather than more strategic, more genuinely present rather than more carefully managed. That man is never just another guy. He was never just another guy. He simply needed the specific circumstances of being categorized as one to discover exactly what he was instead. Comment below, fully myself, if the work of becoming specifically you turned out to be the most distinctive thing you ever did. Let's be honest about the accounting, the specific uncomfortable examination of what was actually happening in the dynamic that allowed the just another guy categorization to persist as long as it did, because the categorization does not sustain itself without cooperation. And the cooperation, however unintentional, however well-meaning, was happening in the specific pattern of unconditional presence and unconditional investment that the dynamic had established. The just another guy category is sustainable precisely as long as the presence within it is unconditional. As long as the man being miscategorized continues to show up with the same investment regardless of whether the investment is being seen or valued. The moment the investment becomes conditional, not in the punishing sense, but in the honest sense of a man whose investment reflects the actual quality of the connection rather than his fear of what happens if he withdraws it, the category becomes untenable. This is not a blame statement about your past behavior. It is the specific, practically useful information that changes how you show up in every future connection. The just another guy category cannot contain a man whose presence is genuinely a choice, whose investment is genuinely contingent on the quality of what is being offered in return, not as a transaction, but as the natural expression of a man who respects his own time and energy sufficiently to direct them toward what is genuinely worthy of them. That man does not stay long enough in any dynamic to be miscategorized as just another guy, because his natural value-driven behavior makes the miscategorization structurally impossible to maintain. Comment below. My presence is a choice if you finally made your investment conditional on the quality of what it's meeting. Here is what the period following the just another guy assessment has been building, not in service of her eventual recognition, not in service of the satisfaction of being proven right, but in service of the only outcome that is genuinely and permanently yours. The period has been building the specific, embodied, earned through living knowledge of your own distinctiveness, not as an affirmation you tell yourself, but as a truth you have lived into through the specific and demanding experience of being seen as common and choosing daily not to become common because of that seeing. That knowledge changes everything, not just about how you move through relationships, about how you move through every room, every conversation, every interaction with every person who encounters you from here forward. Epictetus taught that the man who knows himself truly, deeply through honest self-examination conducted consistently over time, is the man who is most difficult to permanently diminish, because you cannot tell a man who genuinely knows his own worth that he is worth less and have the telling stick. He hears it, he feels it perhaps. And then he returns to the ground of his own daily practice and the knowledge he has built there. The knowledge that does not come from anyone's assessment of him, but from his own accumulated experience of choosing himself consistently, and he remains exactly as he was. The just another guy assessment was an attempt to diminish. The specific and permanent result of this period is that the attempt failed. Not because you proved it wrong to her, because you proved it wrong to yourself. Comment below, decline didn't stick, if what she thought about you never had the power to change what you knew about yourself. Let's address what happens if she comes back, because the recognition that the just another guy assessment was an error frequently produces exactly that. The man who has done the genuine Stoic work in the period following the categorization, who has genuinely relocated his worth, genuinely invested in his own becoming, genuinely arrived at the specific equanimity of someone who is okay either way. That man does not respond to her return the way the man who was waiting responds. He does not feel the flood of relief that immediately restores the previous dynamic, as though the miscategorization and everything it revealed about the dynamic had never happened. He engages, warmly, honestly, from the grounded place the work built, and he pays specific, honest attention to what she is actually bringing. The question is not, is she back? It is, has the specific condition that made the miscategorization possible actually changed? Has she done the genuine inner work of examining why she moved quickly to categorize what the dynamic was that made unconditional presence feel like a given rather than a gift, and what would be different in how she shows up in a reconnected dynamic? Those questions are not hostile. They are the natural, honest, self-respecting questions of a man who has done enough genuine accounting of the previous dynamic to know what would need to be different for re-engagement, to be worth the investment of everything he has built in the period of her absence. Warmth, honesty, clarity, not armor, not punishment. The specific, grounded, freely given engagement of a man who is there by choice and is willing to explore whether the conditions now support that choice being made sustainably. Comment below, my terms only, if the return only matters if the dynamic is actually different this time. The final thing, the one that every thread of this video has been building toward. She thought you were just another guy. That was her biggest mistake. Not because being categorized as just another guy is an objective assessment of diminished worth, but because the man who was placed in that category and chose to respond to it, not by collapsing into its definition, but by doing the daily, genuine, unsexy work of becoming more specifically and authentically himself. That man is the specific, living disproof of the category, not through argument, through existence, through the specific quality of a man who has been tested in exactly the place he was most vulnerable to testing, in his sense of his own distinctiveness, in his belief that what he brings is genuinely worth bringing, and who chose himself through that test with the specific, imperfect, daily practice discipline that the Stoics were always pointing toward. That man is not just another guy. He was never just another guy. And the life he is building, from the ground of the specific knowledge of his own worth that this experience produced, is the life that makes the just another guy assessment not just wrong, but permanently irrelevant. Not because it was corrected by her, because it was corrected by him, in the specific, daily, unglamorous, irreplaceable way that only genuine self-investment produces. Like and subscribe to Stoic Blessing. Stay grounded, stay whole, stay unbreakable.